If you understand the cost of doing business, the game is yours to win. Expense accountability, or holding expenses accountable. What do I mean? How do we do it, and what's the benefit? What is expense accountability? I fundamentally believe the most successful business people we've worked with understand the expenses of their business in a very, very fine amount of detail. If you know that all up to deliver your product is $100, you know that you have to sell that for $150, $160, whatever the price is. But when you know what your cost is of doing business, the game is yours to win. Expense accountability is designed to get the responsibility of expenses within your business to be a shared responsibility. Because what you want to have is people who are responsible for making buying decisions within your business to treat the money that they're using to spend as if it were their own. How do we bring expense accountability to life in your business? It's a very simple process, but I always love to say never confuse simple with easy, because this takes discipline, it takes method, it takes consistency in doing it. Otherwise you won't get the result. What you need to do first of all, and any software program should be able to do this, is get your profit and loss out of your software program and put it into an Excel format. Once you've done that, this is like cooking a cake, but more profitable, unless you're the cheesecake shop. You can get rid of everything to do with revenue and keep purely your expenses of your business. And we're going to then add a few more columns to this. So you can get rid of the numbers. You don't need to have your profit from last month, last year, or current financial year to date. You can get rid of all the numbers. All you need to see are the expenses themselves. And we're going to add a few columns in terms of the following. The first column is the nature of the expense. Now, if you've watched our other video around expenses, around the 4 different types of expenses, this is designed to itemize which of those categories is it going to go into. So as a quick refresher, it's going to be materials, it's going to be people, it's going to be compliance, and it's going to be investments. So you need to put next to each account which one they fall into. And you'll pick up on some trends very quickly around this. You'll find that the vast majority of expenses by line item are compliance. So all of a sudden it then leads you to the next few questions. But if you have that there as a benchmark and as a starting point, it then helps you with focus. Because remembering, the accountability is around providing focus for areas of improvement to make sure you're not overspending in certain areas and therefore increasing your profit. The next area is frequency. Do we want you worrying about your bank charges every single day of the year? No, of course not. Do we want you worrying about your material purchases twice a year? No, you need to think about that all the time. So we need to put in there a level of frequency. So it can be daily, then you'll move up to potentially monthly, bi-monthly, quarterly, twice a year, or annually. So an example of something you might review annually would be your insurance expense. Another example would be things like your accounting fees, where you pay your accountant once a year. You might only look at that on an annual basis because that's the degree of focus and time you need to spend on those areas. Through to something like people and materials. People, you might review those expenses once a month. Have we got the right team? Are we getting a return on investment for the team and the cost that they incur to our business relative to the return they provide us, and all the way down to materials, which needs to be our daily or weekly obsession on those areas, and everything in between. The next element is controllability. So we've looked at the nature of the expense, we've looked at how frequently we should be reviewing that expense. Now we're looking at the controllability of that expense. So for example, if you have a property that you're renting, the controllability of that rent is actually relatively low. Same thing with the rates that you might pay on it, same with your electricity bill. Now, if you don't have solar panels in place, there isn't really much more you can do with your electricity. So the degree of controllability around regulated type expenses is very low. The other end of the spectrum are elements that we have a very high degree of controllability around. So they might be things like staff amenities, staff training, advertising and marketing, Elements that we can turn on or turn off as we wish. So it's not like we're regulated. We don't have to do that to run our business, but we have a very high degree of controllability. If we say tomorrow we're going to do a marketing campaign that's going to triple the investment we make in our marketing, that is a very controllable decision. We can also turn off the same marketing campaign the next day. Very high degree of controllability. So more and more of your time is going to be focused on those controllable expenses. The next element is impact. So we want to understand how much influence we have over it, how frequently we should be looking at the expense, but then what's the impact on that? There might be something that we have a very high degree of control over, and we look at it twice a year. We could potentially turn that off tomorrow, and that might be staff amenities. We stop giving everyone access to the coffee machine, we stop giving them biscuits at morning tea, things like that. But really, how much impact is that having on your business? It's probably not saving you a huge amount of money. Probably the opposite of that, it's actually counterproductive because it might harm workplace culture and the feeling of like, hey, these people aren't trying to help me do my job and giving me some creature comforts of doing my job. So the impact is very low in terms of reducing that expense, and if anything, it's actually counterproductive. Conversely, what's our return on our people? What's the cost of our people? What is the cost of our materials? That has a massive impact on our business. Through all these different elements, we're going, how frequently should we be reviewing them? How much impact it has on our overall performance? The missing element is who is going to be accountable for it. You need to have a particular person accountable for each of these expenses. And it's okay if you have the same person multiple times. That is not unusual. But you need to have somebody accountable. So if I'm going to use Roger or I'm going to use Jill, they know they are responsible for reviewing this expense. We've found somebody to hold accountable for an expense, but what are we going to do to let them know whether they're doing a good job or a poor job in terms of that accountability? Well, it's either using budget or a benchmark. So ideally what we would have at the start of the financial year, you would have a budget around how much you intend to spend on the different areas of your business, whether that's people, occupancy, telephones, and you can compare how they're going versus the budget to where you're at year to date. But also further to that, you can add context. So for example, if you thought for your targets this year, you're going to grow the business by 10% and have 10 people, but you've grown 40%, you're naturally going to need more people to satisfy that demand. So it's not just an automatic, hey, we failed because we now got more people. There's also context around it and understanding how you're performing relative to the growth, or dare we say it, or dare we want it, contraction in the business as well. So then we look at benchmark, which is for more things that are investment in nature. Think advertising and marketing, think staff training, think consultants. There might not necessarily be a very objective way of reviewing it other than budgeting, but on top of that, you want to understand, are you getting a return on investment? So if we're doing the $50,000 marketing campaign, what is our assessment of what we're getting from the $50,000? So we might have allowed $100,000 over the course of the year, but if we're 50 grand in and we're getting nowhere, then why do we necessarily want to spend the extra 50 just to get us to budget? So there's that subjective element too of reviewing how we're going versus a benchmark, not just a budget, in particular for those kind of investments. So in summary, this is what we need to do. Get your information out of your finance system, put it into Excel, get rid of all the information except for the name of the expense accounts. Firstly, look at the nature of the expense. Is it compliance? Is it investment? Is it people? Is it materials? How frequently are we going to review those expenses? Is it daily? And the only things we're probably going to look at daily would be material type expenses. Is it going to be monthly? Is it going to be once every year? Is it going to be twice a year? How frequently are we looking at it? What is then the controllability around it? How much control do we have around the expense itself? How much impact does that have on our overall performance? Who's going to be responsible for reviewing it? And then how do we go with budget or benchmark around what we want to do?